Hi, everyone, and happy third Thursday. We are so excited to have you here with us, whether you're new or a returning viewer. My name is Sarah, and I'm the Sexual Violence Prevention and Harm Reduction Coordinator here at Algonquin College. I'm really looking forward to hosting today's third Thursday Infusions Edition. Before we jump into this afternoon, I want to acknowledge that I'm opening this event from the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin people. Our speaker is joining us today from Toronto, the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haddisones that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited to this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. I invite each of you to put in the chat an acknowledgement of the territory you are joining us from. Algonquin College is working towards reconciliation, and this acknowledgement is just a small reminder of the large commitment. The college respectfully thanks these Indigenous peoples for hosting us on their ancestral lands. Miigwech, thank you. A few housekeeping items. Today's event is closed captioned in English. To turn on closed captioning, please press the CC icon along the bottom of your toolbar. This event is also being recorded. The recording will be available in the Third Thursday website in the coming days. We encourage you to use the chat and engage with our college community. We have some incredible speakers today who will be talking and we'll have taking questions after their talk. So get them ready and you can submit them in the Q&A tab. Today's Third Thursday is a riveting keynote by Toronto journalist and award-winning author, Eternity Martis, who will discuss how campus culture and institutional responses have proven harmful for students who experience systematic marginalization and propose strategies for building a culture of respect, inclusion, and belonging. Third Thursdays are all about sparking ideas, and creating community at Algonquin College. Every month, we hear from experts and innovators to share stories that inspire and empower us to be the best we can be, no matter what that looks like. Tim, let's play the video to help share the philosophy behind Third Thursday.
The fifth season of Third Thursday. Third Thursdays are conversations that spark ideas and create community. Every month, we invite local experts and innovators to share stories that inspire and empower listeners. Tune in on the third Thursday of every month from your home. We challenge you to change your space into a place, and we'll bring inspiring innovators from inspiring places to you virtually. Let's explore this new reality together. Students, employees, alumni, and community partners forge meaningful connections while learning from each other. The Third Thursday community is story-driven, curious, and collaborative, and we're not afraid of perspective shifts or pushing the envelope. We skip the small talk and dig deep into topics that matter. We're here to fuel dreams through dialogue and turn passion into purpose. Come and be a part of the story.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sarah Gon, and I'm actually the Inclusion and Diversity Specialist here at the college, and I have the privilege of introducing our speaker today, Eternity Martis. So we've invited her here today to help us reflect on the importance of building a culture of belonging in higher education during Black History and Black Futures Month. Many of us have probably heard Chimamanda Adichie's TED Talk, where she speaks to the danger of a single story. In a not dissimilar manner, Eternity's memoir, They Said This Would Be Fun, right here, shows us the power of a single book. So this novel, documenting her personal experiences, are raw, poignant, and powerful. But she's not going to let you, the reader, become comfortable in writing it off as a single story. She evidences through research and media coverage the pervasiveness of misogynoir, which is the combination of sexism and racism that's uniquely experienced by Black women in the Canadian post-secondary system. But you didn't come here today to hear me talk about her story. Let me formally introduce our speaker, Eternity Martis. She is an award-winning Toronto-based journalist. She was the 2017 National Magazine Awards finalist for Best New Writer and the 2018 winner of the Canadian Online Publishing Awards for Best Investigative Article. Her writing has appeared in Vice, Huffington Post, The Walrus, CBC, Hazlitt, The Fader, Salon, and of course on academic syllabi around the world. Her work on race and language has influenced media style guide changes across the country. She's a course developer and the instructor of Reporting on Race, the Black community in the media at Ryerson University, the first of its kind in Canada, and the 2021 Asper Visiting Professor at UBC. She's earned an honors BA and a certificate in writing from Western University and a master's in journalism from Ryerson X University. In 2020, she was named one of Canada's top 100 most powerful women by Women's Executive Network. Amazing. We're so lucky to have her today. So her best-selling memoir, they said this would be fun, was a best book of the year picked by the Globe and Mail, Apple, Audible, Chapters, and Indigo. CBC called the book one of 20 moving Canadian memoirs to read now. And if you haven't had a chance to read it yet, don't worry. We have 20 copies that are going to be given away to people who are attending today. And Pop Sugar named it one of 5 books about race on college campuses every student should read. This year, they said this would be fun, won the Kobo Emerging Writing Prize for Nonfiction. Okay, enough from me. Let's now hear more from her directly. Welcome, Eternity.
Thank you, Sarah. That was such a generous introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Eternity. Thank you for being here with me today. And thank you to Algonquin College for having me here. I'm just thrilled. So before I begin my talk, I just want to clarify a couple of terms I'll be using just for folks who may not be familiar with them. So I'll be using the term ByPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, People of Color, and QT-BIPOC, which is Queer, Trans, Black, Indigenous, People of Color. So I will begin. So by my second month at Western University, I still hadn't seen more than a handful of Black people, and I was getting so worried. My family and friends back home, and even strangers who I had giddily told about my move to London, had already warned me, Black people don't go to Western. Are you sure you want to do this? But of course I wanted to do this. I was 18 and I was ready for a new adventure. As a shy and sheltered teenager from Toronto, I was ready to shake off the loner box that I was placed in by my peers and start anew at this place that Maclean's magazine promised was a top party school in Canada. My pride overtook any nagging feelings that I had that I probably should have asked what these people's warnings about Western meant. But at the same time, 2010 was not the era where you Googled, "Is my university racist?" and found an actual answer, if you found one at all. I hoped I would see other Black people on campus. I daydreamed about it, but nothing was manifesting. And with dread, I was starting to feel the twinge of loneliness. Then one day, on my way to class, I was crossing the bridge over the Thames River, and I saw a Black girl on the other side going south as I was going north. She looked at me. Another Black girl? I was so thrilled. And this bridge was so narrow that it would be impossible to miss each other. Impossible not to smile and nod heads like Black folk did back in Toronto. And so I started to imagine how our interaction would go. Would we stop and pull each other aside and say, "Girl, it is so good to see you," or "How are you doing?" or "You were right about this place." I imagine us being lifelong friends, spending our breaks in between classes, eating lunch together and laughing loudly in the cafeteria, unbothered by the white students passing by who thought we were obnoxious and entitled. This was going to be my moment. It was going to be our moment. And she was going to be my new best friend. As we fast approached each other on the bridge, I got ready to make some serious eye contact with her. She approached, so did I. We were nearly side by side now, almost passing each other by. And I looked up at her and smiled. And she looked up all right, but she looked up, up, up and away, averting my gaze completely. I was so crushed. She had seen me, so why did she pretend that I didn't exist? As I continued to see other Black students on campus and naively smiled at them and waved, they looked away, unwilling to acknowledge me or even be acknowledged. And then by my third and fourth year, when I had been so beaten down by my campus, by this new city, and what it meant to be a Black body and a Black woman in this environment, I too started to ignore the glances of innocent first years looking for assurance. The answer had become so clear to me. When you are Black on campus, you are both hypervisible and invisible. Both are detrimental to your well-being. And being seen with other Black people, well, that was also a risk to your safety. From the moment I stepped foot in London, Ontario, I was met with ignorance, both in class and in the city, and often in the form of microaggressions, which are unintentional or intentional gestures, behaviors, comments, and actions that demean or exclude a group. And they often came in the form of what I like to call disclaimers. I've never met a Black person before. Black people are so funny. Is that your real hair? Are you sure you can handle that part of the presentation, or do you need something easier? Where are you from? No, 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 no. Where are you really from? Your English? So good. What country are you from? Africa? Jamaica? In class, I watched with burning shame as the seat next to me always remained empty, despite the whole class being full. I got body checked on the sidewalk when I refused to step off for groups of white students having a conversation. I watched classes shrink on the weeks we had modules on race. And on 3 separate occasions, I had to show no emotion as the only Black person in my English class when we discussed Heart of Darkness and the savagery of Africans. I sat in class angered when my professor, a woman of color, allowed a white woman to interrupt class to say, like, I don't get why we're still talking about slavery, like, get over it. Other times, it was more explicit. On Halloween night, I came face to face with 3 white students dressed as cotton pickers in blackface, their faces painted coal black with overdrawn red lips. They leered at me and my 2 other friends of color, smiling, not saying a word. Other nights, I was threatened with violence and told to go back to my country, despite being born here. And during all of this, I also became a survivor of sexual assault and intimate partner violence, and had to fight to be believed because I didn't fulfill the myth of the perfect white victim. Instead, by my friends, family, and society, I was seen as the aggressor because I was a Black woman. I had all these stories and experiences buried at the back of my throat, just ready to launch them at anyone who would listen, so I could prove that I had entered something that resembled the American South, not Southwestern Ontario. However, when I told my loved ones back home in Toronto, they didn't actually believe me. My family are immigrants from Karachi, Pakistan, and they had a hard time understanding that what I was experiencing was anti-Black racism, even though I have a Jamaican father. They had grown up not seeing me as any color, and while they had experienced anti-South Asian racism here in Canada, they expected racism to be long over. Are you sure you're not exaggerating? They'd ask. But it's 2010. Is racism even a thing? We thought that was done. Maybe you misunderstood them. After all, you're so angry these days. My friends at home also weren't convinced that my experiences were real. Their denial made me think that I was making it up, despite feeling deep fear, anxiety, sadness, loneliness, depression, and common colds, all well-documented effects of experiencing or just anticipating racism. And with no media coverage or visible stories about racism at the time, I felt completely alone. No one believed me, and I was starting to not believe myself. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was too sensitive, too angry, too ready to see everything as racism. Now, it's true that this is my experience, but this experience is not an isolated one. It might even be similar to some folks here in this room. In the years since I've left Western, I've traveled the world and met students of color and Black students with eerily similar experiences to mine. Students who are in school now, who have just graduated or graduated in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And their stories of navigating racism among students and faculty, or while out in the city, or of experiencing microaggressions, threats of violence, and the exotification of their bodies, these stories have never left them. These are all urgent reminders of the intergenerational trauma that post-secondary institutions can inflict on the students, despite its best intentions. Campuses are seen as a place of progressiveness and a valuable exchange of ideas. But campuses are also one of the biggest perpetrators of institutional oppression, hiding behind the guise of freedom of speech to allow harmful rhetoric to silence and empower some young people, those with power and privilege, at the expense of other young people, those who are considered underserved communities. Campus policies are all about protecting these powerful and privileged students, and is evident in our lack of unified policies to deal with racism. It's evident in the policies to deal with sexual assault, which discourage young women and other survivors of color, other queer and trans survivors from reporting or speaking out about being raped. And it's evident right now in these long overdue conversations still taking place in 2022. The cushion between a safe place to make mistakes in the real world, post-secondary education, by its mandate, has allowed racism to go unchecked, damaging the health and well-being of students of color while validating the perpetrators. In researching my memoir, They Said This Would Be Fun, I learned that my experience at Western was an experience happening at every single campus in the country. There are thousands of Black students having my experience right now, some of whom might be in this virtual room. Every school is dealing with alt-right and white pride flyers and anti-racism, sexism, and homophobic and transphobic threats on campus. Every school is struggling to understand what our concerns and our needs are, or just how many Black students and other students of color attend their schools because there is no race-based data collected. Schools have little understanding that young Black and brown men are being carded at disproportionate rates and then have to come to campus and face more policing by campus security. They have little understanding that not seeing yourself represented on campus in Eurocentric course materials and in class contributes to the dropout rates of Black students. That's even more devastating considering the achievement of being Black in the ivory tower, when so many students have had their dreams shattered by financial difficulty, disproportionate suspension rates, and streaming practices that start in high school and even earlier. Schools have little understanding of just how pervasive sexual assault on campus is, and it's evident in their lax handling of pro-rape frosh week chants and gag order policies around sexual assault. The first 6 to 8 weeks of school are known as the red zone, when you're more likely to be sexually assaulted. And numerous studies have shown that men who join fraternities are 3 times more likely to sexually assault, and young women in sororities are more likely to be sexually assaulted. Intimate partner violence resources and prevention are not priorities on campus, despite IPV being just as prevalent a crime on campus as sexual assault. In fact, women ages 15 to 24 are the most at risk of intimate partner violence in the country, and BIPOC women are several times more likely to experience these crimes. And regardless of whether it's a lack of understanding or willful inaction, every school in Canada will soon have to hold themselves to account for decades of silence and inaction. For my generation, the deaths of Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown were heavy burdens to carry. For this generation of students, that burden is in the deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and so many others. Today's Black students and students of color are not only coming to school unsure of their academic future in a COVID-19 world, but they're carrying this burden of Black death. But that burden is all of ours now. The burden of erasing anti-Black racism has always remained with Black people, yet it is not for us alone to actively continue to educate, organize, and interrupt racist, sexist, homophobic, and transphobic behavior and rape culture on campus. And despite the burnout of the past 2 years that has been caused, we all must let go of defensiveness and be willing to unlearn in order to create a safer environment for everyone. Students today are way more knowledgeable than I was about racism and gender-based violence. Today, there are plenty of stories and media reports to prove that the things that I experience are not exceptions, but realities based on systemic and institutional racism. Today, students are not just dealing with student life, but with anti-racist, homophobic, transphobic, ableist, and sexist rhetoric, not to mention a renewed white supremacy movement, yet are leading our largest social justice conversations on campus. Today, students have access to social media to share and document stories. They know what they will and won't stand for. And if they know what they'll stand for, all that's left is for their school and their peers to step up and stand up with them. BIPOC students need visible, immediate support and resources for speaking about racist experiences and hate incidents, which are interactions that are hateful and racist, but don't violate the law. And despite hate crimes and hate incidents hitting a record high in Canada, our laws are so far behind what's happening in the real world when it comes to experiencing hate. BIPOC students need zero tolerance policies with real action and real accountability. They need a place to file complaints and have them taken seriously. However, research shows that most students who experience a racist act or even sexual violence don't file a formal complaint because they fear they won't be believed, or the school has done so little that they end up resolving it themselves. There should also be stricter policies for filing complaints against professors who use the N-word and other racist and sexist terminology in class, emboldened by the idea of a free speech learning environment. Women, including LGBTQ2S+ people, need more comprehensive supports to deal with the alarming rates of intimate partner violence, sexual assault, harassment, and discrimination they face on campus. For BIPOC women, or QT BIPOC, the rates of sexual and partner violence is several times higher than their white, cis, and heterosexual counterparts. This also includes higher rates for Indigenous women and women with disabilities. BIPOC and QT BIPOC students need immediate access to counseling and mental health services, a service separate from the general wait list for mental health services, and one staffed by QT BIPOC and BIPOC professionals. Because as we already know, experiencing constant racism is not only dehumanizing, it can actually make you sick. Extensive research has shown that constant exposure to racism can contribute to common colds, hypertension, certain cancers, depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts. BIPOC students need agency. They deserve to have their mental health and emotional labor and choices protected and respected by the school. Schools, including here at Algonquin, shouldn't rely on student activism to do its accountability work. And if students are asked to do this work, they should be fairly compensated. But students especially should not be asked to do this work if their school cannot make the very easy decision to say that Black Lives Matter. For the record, Black Lives Matter isn't choosing a side or a political affiliation, or the enemy of free speech. These are excuses that contribute to silence, and that silence is violence. BIPOC students need more courses that reflect their history and lived experiences, and a curriculum that is inclusive of the works beyond the canon. BIPOC students need and deserve faculty members who look like them and can offer valuable perspectives. But those BIPOC faculty and staff need to be hired in senior and tenure track and long-term positions with senior and tenure track and long-term salaries. Black students need their peers and their professors to unlearn and help others unlearn through extensive, ongoing, and accountability process training so that they have a fighting chance at graduating. BIPOC students need allies. A good ally doesn't post a Black square to Instagram or read a book on race and think that the work is done. Showing up as an ally is a continual process of work and consistency. It doesn't end with anti-racism education or this talk, or asking a person of color to educate you. And allies who feel that they're doing this work don't get to pat themselves on the back just yet. As Cherie Atchison, the Global Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Pekin says, your work and your efforts must be recognized by those you seek to ally with. In other words, if an ally thinks they're being progressive, but a person of color thinks they're more like Leah Michelle, they still have work to do. And there is a ton of work to be done. It's in the blackface parties on campus, at Algonquin included, that affect BIPOC students. At UBC and U of T, where Black students are racially profiled by campus police. At Western, whose students from the 80s and 90s are demanding the school face consequences for their actions for refusing to keep Philip Rushton from teaching students scientific racism. At McMaster, where its student athletes have come forward with their experiences of anti-Black racism. Every single campus in Canada has created a legacy of pain, suffering, and trauma amongst its Black students and students of color. And we must all start chipping away at that legacy so that we can start to heal. And now I ask for all of you to start chipping away at that legacy of trauma. And I ask you all to use your privilege as power. We all have privilege to varying degrees, but not everyone has power. White privilege has the most power. And white privilege isn't based on your individual experience or how hard you've worked, but rather how a society that upholds whiteness benefits you at all costs. But power and privilege can be used for good. Everyone has a responsibility of using their power and privilege to make campus life safer for all students, especially those who must carry the burdens of racism, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia. And you get to decide if you want to lighten the weight on their shoulders or add more to their load. BIPOC students are waiting for allies, but they aren't reliant on anyone. They know survival and they know resilience. And most of all, they know power, the power of lived experience to uplift them and get them through. I'm often asked, how did you survive those 4 years at Western? And my answer is in stories. In my final year, a course on Black women's history in Canada was offered to me, and I enrolled, hoping it wouldn't get canceled like most courses on Black issues did at the school. On the first day of class, I had never seen so many BIPOC women all in one space. Throughout the semester, we laughed, we cried, we cheered each other on, we raged for each other, and we shared stories of what life had been like over the past 4 years. We all had something in common, though. Stories had kept us going in the darkest of times. Stories from friends, sharing our own stories, and reading the stories of others. The works of Black feminists and authors and scholars were my comfort and my home away from home. They included bell hooks, Barbara Smith, Toni Morrison, Sapphire, Audre Lorde, Patricia Hill Collins, Deborah Gray White, Sojourner Truth, Kimberly Crenshaw, Angela Davis. And I saw my struggle in theirs. I saw hope for the future in their words. In my environment of oppression, their words were loud and true to me, a reminder that I had never been alone. And now I leave you with some of these words of possibility. Audre Lorde: for the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us temporarily to beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. Bell hooks: for me, forgiveness and compassion are always linked. How do we hold people accountable for wrongdoing and yet at the same time remain in touch with their humanity enough to believe in their capacity to be transformed? And Angela Davis: you have to act as if it was radically possible to transform the world, and you have to do it all of the time. To gain freedom and equality for all of us, we have to dismantle the house of white supremacy and patriarchy, in this case, the campus. But this house has been so well protected throughout all the storms. To dismantle this house and rebuild it anew, we must bring our own tools to the table and spend long days and nights breaking it down together through consistent, genuine work. That is the radical transformation and healing that we are all here hoping to achieve, and I'm hopeful that we can. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Folks, we are going to start the Q&A. If anyone has any questions that they would like to ask, please put them in the chat now. In the Q&A function, not the chat, so that we can ask them. I will start with some of the pre-submitted questions that we have. So what changes to campus culture would help shape a better experience for the future of Black students? That's starting off with a hard one.
Yeah, that's a big question. I'm working on a story right now for Maclean's about Western, and a lot of the story is about what is campus culture? Can it be changed? And I think the first thing before we even get to the specifics is that campus culture is so deeply embedded, the racism, the misogyny, the homophobia, the transphobia, it's so embedded in the culture. And to be able to break that culture, it's also going to need a change in behavior from students. So that means then on the university and the college's part, it's going in, it's having that mandatory sexual violence training, anti-racism training, and not just one session for 90 minutes, cramming students in. It means getting everybody on the same page. You know, if they don't complete this in 3 months, if they don't have the online module and they don't do in-person, they don't do working groups, you know, you can't register for, you know, the winter semester, for example, which is actually happening at some schools. And so that's the first step, is kind of mandating this, because it's been so optional for so long, and that hasn't worked very well. I think the other thing is that a lot of schools don't quite understand what the needs and the challenges are for students of color, because they don't collect race-based data. And so they kind of go blind. And when we look at who's organizing these events and, you know, who's putting out reports, they don't reflect the race or the demographic of these students, right? They typically tend to be older, white, male. And so there's already a disconnect there. And so I've always kind of advocated for having like immediate mental health services, having like mental health professionals who can help deal with students who are dealing with racism. Because by the time you actually get on the list, on the mental health, you know, the list to see a counselor, you might have graduated by then. Like the list is just so long. And there's really no kind of understanding on campus of what constitutes a hate crime, what constitutes hate incidents. And when I was working on the book, I tried to look at the amount of hate incidents that were recorded by campus police across Canada. And I barely found any. I think most campus police didn't even have the category of hate crime or hate incident because they don't know how to log them. But this is happening. What we're hearing from students is that it's happening constantly. So there's a disconnect there. And so that is desperately needed. And also what is desperately needed is an actual kind of comprehensive idea of what gender-based violence prevention programs and services look like. Because right now on campus, it's usually about sexual violence, but gender-based violence is, intimate partner violence has just been added to a couple of policies. So there's still kind of a long ways in understanding what is gender-based violence, what's happening on campus for students. But there's a lot of things, but it has to be that the culture changes and the behavior changes at the same time. The school is responsible for that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's, yeah, 100%. Okay, I think there's actually a lot of questions, which I'm very impressed with.
Yay.
So,
Okay.
yeah. What do you hope people take away from your book?
Oh, that's a big one. Okay. What I hope people take away from the book is, to me, the book, even though it's about racism, the book isn't actually about racism to me. Like, the book is really about like fitting in and belonging and kind of debunking this myth that young people are out here having the best times of their lives. And I think for me, if anyone can take anything away from the book, it's that just because we are young and we go to university, or but just when I was young, that we go to university and we have these experiences, it doesn't mean that we're just having the time of our lives. For a lot of people, this idea of what university and college is, like having a great time, the things that we see in movies like American Pie and The House Bunny, that really is not a luxury for a lot of us. And this generation, my generation, and the generation that is in university right now, they've dealt with some pretty hard obstacles. There's COVID, there's a lot of insecurity around housing and finding a job and just burnout. And there's so many things going on. This is an generation that grew up in mass shootings, school shootings. There's just so much happening, and we tend to dismiss it and say, you're too young, you're too young, what do you know? And I had that experience when I was writing the book. I would even get from people within my own family saying, like, what do you know? What have you lived through? You haven't even suffered enough. And that came up a lot. You haven't suffered enough to write a memoir. So this idea that, like, you have to be suffering, or that you have to be a certain age or a certain race or gender to write a memoir or to talk about your experiences or to even just experience pain and suffering. I think that's what I want people to take away, that that's not true. And the more that we dismiss it, the more that students grow up into adults who then are suffering as adults.
Okay. No, that's some very insightful. And I think, it's important to hear what you think, because having read the book, there's, you talk a lot about experience and what can happen and different folks' experiences, which is, I think everyone needs to hear this. And so it is very important, but I think the takeaways are really good. And there's so many in there. There's lots of different ways to reframe, programming and reframe just everything, the way we deal with incidents. And so, yeah, it's great to hear what your favorite takeaways are. How do you address microaggressions? So, I mean, you did a good job of explaining how you did it in your book.
That's a really hard one, because we're all so different. Our ability to handle confrontation or speak up or establish boundaries is so different for everyone. And I'm not going to say I'm the best person at that. I think, like, when I was a student, I didn't address it at all. Part of it was because I had never experienced anything like that until I got to London. And so I almost like gaslit myself, being like, oh, it's just a joke, or like, did that really happen? Even today when it happens. So, and for folks who maybe aren't sure what microaggressions are, it could be as small as, a white person going up to a Black person, you work in the office, and saying, like, I went on vacation, I'm almost your color, or touching your hair and saying, like, is this your real hair, or your English is great. It's these little things that maybe people don't even mean intentionally. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but it still causes harm to another group. And that can contribute to those severe illnesses that we experience from racism. So for me, I don't know if I've ever handled it properly. I think I've spoken up a couple of times and said, okay, like I don't get it. What are you trying to say? And sometimes there are ways to de-escalate it. Like if there's someone that you trust that you could speak to, especially if you're in a workplace, if you have HR, if you have other people, maybe who, if you're feeling uncomfortable as a person who's an underserved, part of an underserved community, having someone maybe who's white, who's an ally, go with you to talk about it, and not giving into it. If there's a joke, right, not laughing or just saying, what's so funny about this? And so those are some ways you can do it, but it's easier said than done. I think the most important thing about that, regardless of your action, is that you don't take it personally. It's not a personal thing, because that can also eat away at you.
I think, yeah, what you're saying is so important, because it does depend on the person, whether they're reactive or ask others for help. And so, there's lots of trainings on bystander intervention as well for folks to look up. We have some training that I will post in the chat about sexual violence. It's all online for students to participate in, but also it talks a lot about bystander intervention. And though it's not about race, those skills can transfer to any type of microaggressions that you're seeing on campus, off campus, anywhere you are. So that might be a helpful resource for folks as well. So I'll post that in the chat in a minute. What would you say is the strongest coping strategy or response you've found when being singled out or marginalized in a group? Or so I guess similar question, but what is your favorite response?
My favorite response is nothing, just doing the work. So there have been times when, and I consider myself, I was a straight A student. I'm very type A. And there have been situations where people just think I'm dumb. Like I've been in group projects, and I've been that person who immediately people think I'm dumb and I can't do anything. Or I'm not capable of doing something. Or I've been in jobs, even as a journalist today, where there's just this assumption that I can't do something, or I'm not as good as my job as, say, a white male colleague of mine. So my thing has always been, my favorite coping strategy, one, don't take it personally. But then I just show them, because I know who I am, right? And I think it comes with time. But working towards whatever I'm working towards, being successful, and then letting kind of karma and a little bit of time and patience take the reins. That's my favorite. I'm not a very patient person, but I am patient in showing people what I can do. And so sometimes people, they're going to have their opinions of who you are. They're going to have an idea of who you are based on what you look like. And for me, it's just keeping my head down, working, and showing them that that's not true. And that comes with time. So that's how I usually approach something.
Awesome. Someone commented here, if I remember correctly, you told your family not to read the book. If that's true, is there a time in the future you would let them read it?
Yes. So I did let them read the book. It was that I was so terrified that they would read it that I let them read the book, the advanced copy, maybe a month before the book came out. So they knew I'd been writing this book for 10 years. I got the book deal in 2018, and they were like, oh, what's your book about? And all I would say is like my life. And they would never ask. And because I'm from a family, like my family's very liberal, they're really open-minded. They're still brown though. My grandfather is an older South Asian man. I'm like, what is my family going to think of me kind of like talking about partying and dating? And I was scared. Mm-hmm. And I think there's always this small, even, the stuff around sexual violence. And I was in a really abusive relationship. There was a small part of me that was like, I know my family loves me. They'll always be on my side. But what if they turn around and say, why did you get yourself in that position? Why did you do what you did? And so I was really afraid, but that's not something you can really hide. And so I think we had some really tough conversations. We had a lot of emotional conversations, namely around, what could we have done to prevent this, which is not true. When you choose to go I thought I was an adult. I was going off my own. Things happen, right? When you let go of your parents' hand, things happen. But it really opened up the door to have really serious conversations about race. For those who haven't read my book, my family never quite understood when I started to identify as a Black woman. And I would always say, well, look at me. I'm like, I can't identify as brown. When I go out in the world, I experience anti-Black racism. And there's a lot of tension between us as I started to kind of identify as Black. But once they read the book, there was a greater understanding of what that meant. Mm-hmm. And it became, in a way, they became allies to me in this way that wasn't possible before. So I am happy they read it. I did hide it for a while, but they're very supportive.
That's so good to hear. I think it's hard to disclose experiences to your parents, and there's certain things that's like no matter what, my parents would never know because I'm not writing a book about it. But even then you did, and you were very forthcoming with all of your experiences. So it takes a lot of courage to be able to write your story and to like put everything in and all of your trauma and hardships. And so yeah, that's a very vulnerable place that you put yourself in. And I commend you because there's so much insight in there and hope for change and everything. So I guess the next question kind of falls into that of what, for someone who has never written before, what would you say to younger journalists who are looking to tell their story through writing?
This is I love this question. I've been asking and answering this question all week, actually. So I think the first thing, the question isn't clear about what, but I'm guessing kind of telling your story from a place of, marginalization, oppression. I always tell young journalists that your story is going to be on the internet forever. So right now, the way that we get our stories, unfortunately, as people of color, as queer and trans people, is through these kind of trauma narratives, what I call trauma porn. And we get paid a little bit of money, but we get our byline, especially if you're a journalist, you want your portfolio, but it stays on there forever. And sometimes you might end up working with an editor who doesn't quite understand what it means to edit someone's work, or like our work, and they pull, tell me more. You can say a lot without saying everything. And so I think it's important to really consider, can you stand by what you're going to write? Even if it's true, can you stand by it in 5, 10 years? Can you walk into your family party or your friend circle? Are you going to be okay with that? You have to be okay with it. And it can't just be I think writing about yourself, and any kind of memoir writing, it's specific, but it's not universal. It's about you, but it's not really about you. You're trying to get at larger issues, which is why, back to the other question, which is why I shared my experience. I felt like I write, I'm a journalist. This is important for me to illustrate what's going on with something we're not talking about. Are you able to do that beyond just putting your story out there? And so it's something to really consider. And it's also really great to consider, writing, it doesn't have to be for an audience right now. Write it out, that's important. Have a story out there, but put up boundaries for yourself. How much of yourself are you willing to give? Do you have to give all of it? Because you really don't need to do that. And that comes with time as you continue to practice. But all that aside, I think writing your story out, write it the way you want it. Don't think about, editors. Don't think about where it's going to be published. Just start writing it piece by piece. You can record yourself if you're scared of writing, or writing's not your strong suit. You can record it, transcribe it. But our stories are so important because these stories, even though we're telling, memoir is like a big genre right now, these types of memoirs that we have huge connections to the past, to history. Everything we know, right, about slavery, about anti-Black racism, is because we had slave narratives. Everything we know about anti-indigeneity is because we have memoirs, we have writing by residential school survivors, we have storytelling that's been passed through generations. So there is a historical and political component to writing your story that should carry you through it. But also just be mindful that you always want to respect yourself when you tell your story for a public audience.
Okay, that's great. I guess this one is similar because it's how does your process work? Can you speak a little about it? Did you first write articles on related themes and then decide to put it into a book, or how did writing a book start?
Yeah, I've wanted to write a book since I was 8. I just remember this so clearly. I was like, I'm gonna write a book. And so everything kind of in my life, even from that age to the point of writing the book, has always been about writing a book. I want to be a writer. Somebody told me, a high school teacher said, if you want to be a writer, you're going to be broke. So I'm like, I'll be a journalist. And so I've always kind of gone along with that path. How can I get to this book? How can I get to writing what I want to write about? And so in journalism, I write about race, I write about gender, and I used to write about race and gender at a time when journalists were not talking about it. There was no BLM. Nobody would take my stories. They'd say it wasn't newsworthy, it was inflammatory, talking about race was political. There was a time, and this is only 2015, where I was not allowed. I used to work at intern at CBC, and they wouldn't let me write about Black people because they thought it meant I was part of Black Lives Matter. Like, people did not understand the difference between Black Lives Matter organizers and Black people. So what I would do is I would look for more kind of edgier publications like Vice, and I would write stories that I hoped one day, a lot of them were personal, or they started personal and then they were they'd go into some reporting. I hope one day I could make those part of the book that I was writing. And I had decided very early on in my time at Western, probably the first year of my time at Western, that I was going to write this book about my life. And so I would just document everything. I'd write things down. I had a blog. I started pitching stories when I was 19, 20. And a lot of those stories ended up making it into the book in some form or the other, not like copy and pasted, but they were about my experience and they were already out there, and I knew the reaction to them already and what that meant. And so it was easy for me to then transfer it over into the book. So I really do recommend, if you're thinking about writing a book about anything really, seeing if you can get publications involved first, see if you can pitch it, build yourself up that way. It's also easier to get a book deal that way because you're seen as an expert. But pro tip, always negotiate the contract. Always. It doesn't matter. All contracts are negotiable, because sometimes new writers get so excited about seeing that they're going to have a byline or their name in print, and then they sign a contract, but that school has the publication has the rights to your work. So you can negotiate to keep the rights to your work so that when you publish your book, the rights are yours already.
Okay, good. That's a good tip for sure. How has your life changed since publishing your book?
Oh,
or has it?
It's changed a lot. It's changed a lot. I feel a lot lighter. I think that's the first thing. I feel a lot better. Like, before I wrote the book, I don't think I had worked through anything. And the majority of what was in the book, I hadn't actually realized I'd gone through. Like, I wrote it down, but I didn't realize the impact of it and how, when I came out of Western, I was so angry all the time. I was so unhappy. I was so miserable. I was always getting sick. And I realized that so much of why I was like that was because I had kind of kept in all of this stuff that had happened. So in a way, it was therapeutic for me. And so I feel a lot lighter personally. But then, the book came out at an interesting time. I think it was a few months later, George Floyd was murdered, and things just kind of changed again. My book came out the day that everything shut down at least in Ontario, right? So I'm like, this book is done. I worked 10 years on it. I'm getting nothing. And then that happened, and it kind of reignited this conversation about anti-Black racism. So I was able to quit my full-time job and do this, talk to people all day. I get to talk about my book, and I get to talk about anti-Black racism and gender-based violence. The TV show is actually happening. So I'm working on the TV show for this book. I am teaching. I'm going to be a full-time associate professor at X University in the fall. So a lot of things have happened as a result of this book, which is really exciting. But I think, to me, the most important, like the best thing, is that I do feel better. And that is what I was hoping to happen.
So it was almost like a therapeutic process, having your story out there.
It was, but it wasn't writing it. Like, if I had to write it again, I don't know if I would. And I hear this a lot from memoirists. It felt like a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. A lot of tears, for sure. Because writing is so isolating. You're like locked in your room. And I would sit there on the weekends. My friends were going out. They were dating. They were getting married. And I'm just here writing this book. No agent, no publisher, nothing. But it felt important to me. And so I don't miss that. But I think the end result was really great for me.
There's questions about your show now, which I also am interested in. Sarah wants to know who's going to star as you, and tell us more about the show and who's starring as you, and where's it, when's it coming out, where it's going to air, all those things we need to know. What's it called?
Sure. So I don't know I don't have the answer to a lot of this yet, but
okay,
I'll have hopefully have a say in who they cast. So I'm currently working on writing. We're trying to pitch it soon. So I have a co-writer. We're working on writing the show, or shaping the show. And the TV and film rights were purchased by Boat Rocker Media. So they did Orphan Black and Temple Street Productions. Yeah. So we're in very early stages, and TV is kind of finicky.
Yep.
So we're just trying, to get things kind of off the ground right now, but it's a really cool experience. Like I've always wanted to get into TV writing. And so to have the book turn into a TV show is like very exciting for me. So.
Yeah, that's like, it must feel almost surreal. Like
it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. What advice would you give to staff who are balancing advocating for students' needs while still being representatives of an institution?
Yeah, that's like a really tough one. I haven't been in that position yet, so I don't want to give it any not so good advice. But I think there's another part of that question that is missing is how do you care for yourself while doing that? Because I think that especially for faculty and staff who are, BIPOC or queer, trans, you're doing more work. Statistically, you do more work, you do more service work, you're advising students more. So if you have students of color, then, you're getting the students of color, and that also wears on you and, your kind of your work and your work-life balance. But I know at X University, they had a lot of trouble with that because their students in the School of Journalism, they said, we don't feel supported, we don't feel represented, we don't feel safe. And there was a real kind of battle between like, how do we take care of our students and say we believe them, and then deal with like the bureaucratic stuff or the higher up stuff. And that's a decision. I think it really depends on the institution, but I think the best professors in faculty and staff in those cases had conversations with their students and were just honest and transparent about it, and said, in class, or if it was Zoom, turn the recording off for that time and said, like, this is what's happening. I stand with you, I support you, the work you're doing. On the other side, I'm part of faculty, right? Or I'm part of this institution, but I'll do my best. I think even if we're afraid of losing our jobs or afraid of the repercussions, we're still there for students at the end of the day, and they need to feel supported. So it's important that they do know that, but you're also transparent that it can be difficult. And I think that's as much as we can ask for. I know some faculty who are not in full-time positions, they're like, power to the students, like, we'll march with you. There is a little bit less to lose in some ways, but it's still a really difficult decision to make, fine line to walk.
Yeah, it is hard. I've been asked this one before because people still need to feed themselves and house themselves, and so it's like advocating for your students. You can't also get yourself fired, but ultimately, like, I think it's important to remember that like the reason everyone has a job is to support students. So what does that look like, and how can you do that in a safe way, which is safe for your students and yourself, and that's going to look different for everyone, but yeah, I always advocate for safety. I also wanted to also just remind folks that we do have like an EAP program, employee assistance program, if folks did want to talk to someone or like seek any type of like counseling, they're able to access that. And students as well, remember that we have counseling services. We have an Indigenous counselor specifically for Indigenous students. We do have counselors, Black counselors as well too. So if you are looking for something specific, when you call the Welcome Center, you can ask for a specific counselor or talk about your needs, and they'll be able to match you with someone. So I think that's also very important to remember, that we have that free. It's free for all students. Our wait lists are not like the same that I know other institutions that you were talking about or before Eternity have. So it's you're able to kind of get in and see a counselor, and we also have fantastic group counseling as well. So that's something that folks can access as well too.
That's amazing, but I just want to say that's amazing. Like, that is like really excellent. So the fact that you have like an Indigenous counselor and Black counselor, just that's great. So like above what a lot of institutions I've spoken to actually have. So that's really good to hear.
Yeah, I think, and I remember being a student myself, and I didn't know about so many supports. And I will say that having worked at Algonquin for so long now, we have so many supports that people don't know exist. And so it's really great to talk about them and say, like, these are all the things that we have. Sarah Gahn is posting all the resources that folks can access as well. So the Welcome Center is there. You can ask some questions. I'll post about our peer, the Beacon, it's called, is a health and wellness peer drop-in. You can speak to other peers who can support you as well. Okay, back to the questions. The support's important, but people are here for you. So what have or what can I guess institutions do to promote this to their students before beginning their studies? That's the question. So I'm not really sure exactly what this means, but I'm wondering if how can it says what have students done to promote this before students begin their studies? I'm not sure if they mean your book or I'm not actually sure what the question means. We might skip that one. We can come back to it. Folks, if that was your question, please kind of give me a little bit more clarity on it. I thought I read it in my head differently, but what can leaders in higher education do to challenge systems of oppression?
Well, I think it's a big, these are all great questions, just very
Right?
big questions.
Big ones. Gonna fix them all today.
Came with all the questions. Okay. Yeah. I think what I've seen, I was just saying how I was working on this McLean story, when it seems like a lot of the issue, aside from campus culture, a lot of the issue is actually administration getting in their own way. And that is very problematic because it sends the message, one, that you're only concerned with your reputation, what you look like, and two, that you don't care about your students. And three, that you're only willing to do something in a reactive way, not a proactive way. So I think that a lot of leaders at institutions right now, they need to let go of this like defensiveness or real fear that by admitting that something that occurs, right? Like something that occurs at every campus, which is there's drinking, there's violence, there's racism, there's all kinds of things. It's not unique to that campus. And yet administrators have a really hard time admitting that for some reason, as if like, the floodgates are going to open. I've heard from folks that, like experts saying, well, once they admit wrongdoing, then it's over. But racism, sexism, homophobia, these happen in all kinds of spaces. It's not unique to campus. So just like that first step would mean a lot. The other thing is that I don't think they quite understand what these, the impact of experiencing these type of traumas and experiences have on their students. A lot of folks in these higher up positions don't really have that experience. They don't share that experience. And so bringing in more training for themselves, I think this happens across the board, but the training tends to go to the employees and never to like the higher senior managers and all of that. It's like, well, it's a problem they can deal with. The problem actually is up there. And they need to have an ongoing accountability process, and they need to be in the groups, or, the group meetings, and they need to do the modules. Like they need to do that as well. And they also need to make room at the top for other people. So bringing in people of color, bringing in people with expertise that can help. But what happens is, and I have a couple of friends who have been in these positions in terms of, they are the anti-racism vice president of anti-racism coordinator, somebody to the provost. And so they make these positions and then they get up there and they do some good work. And then up top, the administration says, that's too much. Like, that's too much, like, anti-racism stuff for today. We can't do that. Or, we're not footing the bill anymore. And then they leave. So the structure is still so hostile. And so these are, there are a million things they can do, but I think the first thing is just being open to this and being open to it as a commitment, as a lifelong commitment, as long as you're at the institution, to change, and not just try to change like from the bottom or the top down, but just change at the top. They need to take some ownership for that.
Yeah, that's great. Now that you're older, would there be anything you tell your past self during the experiences you had? And yeah. I don't think they're calling you older. Just now that you're finished.
Yeah, I'm not old. Just kidding.
I was like, offensive. No, I'm kidding.
It's happening whether I like it or not. I appreciate that. It's yeah. Now that I'm older, I think I would have like, I wish I had known myself more. Like, it didn't feel cool to know myself or take the time to know myself. And so I did a lot of things that I didn't want to do. I just did them because it seemed like it was a cool thing to do, or it was a thing that 20-something-year-olds did. And that got me into a lot of trouble because I never listened to my intuition. Like, my gut and my intuition, as we all have it, mine is very strong, and I would just ignore it and end up in these terrible situations. And so I wish that I had like listened to myself a bit more. And I wish that I didn't take things so personally, because everything that happened, I would get really upset, right? Somebody said something to me, somebody did something to me, and then I would take it so personally, and then I couldn't function. And none of this is personal. And so I wish I just had a better sense of self, and I listened to myself more. And that's something I'm working on now, and it's paying off. But I think that even from like high school, we need to be teaching, like intuition literacy, like not just like financial literacy, like, listen to your gut, like your human, alarm bell. So
yeah, when I was like listening to your story and you're talking about the first time you used a bong, and so I also manage our sexual violence prevention portfolio, but our harm reduction portfolio. And I was like, this is such a important conversation for young people to have, of like, we talk a lot about like safest way to use substances and how to use them in the least harmful way. But like, it's so true. You were like, I wasn't confident how to do it, but I didn't want to look like a newbie. So I didn't. And I was just like, it's so true. And that's the whole intuition point you're speaking of, is like, these are things that awareness that our students, I wish like everyone, but confidence doesn't come when you're 18 for everyone. Like that's something that folks have to learn throughout. And so it's good to hear you say that you wish you were, but I feel like it's kind of most of our students are in that same boat of like trying to figure out who they are. And so, but it's a good takeaway is like advocate for yourself and your needs and your wants. And I totally think that's good for our students here. Yeah.
It's really cool and okay to go to bed at 10 on a Saturday if you want to, like, all those things are okay. It's really cool to not have that one more drink. And like, the hard part about this, and this maybe is a cautionary tale for your students, is that I'm still trying to undo a lot of that, like what I did as a student. I'm still trying to undo it now. I'm like, oh, it's like 11 o'clock. I'm not going to go to sleep now. It's like too early. It's not cool. It's like, yeah, right. It sticks with you. So developing these habits, not, you don't have to be perfect, but some of these habits that we're like, we think are not cool for like 18, 19-year-olds. These are good habits that you can start.
Totally. I totally agree. What is one experience of systematic marginalization that you'll never forget?
Oh, so many. So this is like in my adult life, but so as I was just sharing, I had a really rough time early in my career writing about race because no one wanted to talk about race. And I would constantly get like questions from employers like, can you write about anything besides Black people? You can't write about Black people. Just this very like confused reaction. But when I finally did get my first job in journalism, I went to a place that was like supposed to be progressive, and a lot of like traditional media looked down on it. And I went there and I spent a lot of time there, and I was the only one with a master's degree. We had a lot of staff, like the morale was very low, and I kind of turned it around. Me and another person turned it around very quickly from like no recognition. I used my content. I built this place from the ground up. And at every point in this journey, I was kind of set back by senior management, by older contributors who just didn't like me. And so they'd have meetings without me. And I don't know if it was more about race as so much it was about being a woman and my age. And they'd have meetings about me, or somebody would complain because we'd have writers, literally, white writers talking about like very, very offensive things like slavery and, why the police why they love the police, and having me, edit it. And when I'd stand up, they would complain and have these meetings without me, never acknowledge anything that I was doing. And it was constantly like that. And it went from that to that, things that we hear about, microaggressions, which is comments about my hair. My hair is out of control. My hair is wild. Your face looks upset. Why does your face look like that? Like just that kind of stuff that Black women are subjected to. And it was like every day, to the point where I actually would get sick. Like before I go to work, I would be nauseous. I'd be sweaty. I'd be clammy. And it was just constant being out of the environment. And I ended up quitting because during the protests in this over the summer for George Floyd, they released a statement like hashtag Black Lives Matter, we support Black lives. And I was their only Black employee. And I was like, this is not right. I quit. And so it was a constant type of thing. And so you may not walk away from something immediately, but for me, the distinction, I don't want to work anywhere where their values don't align with what they're saying. And sometimes, that happens quite a bit, but it was just so blatantly obvious that I had to get out of the situation. So that was it. And now I get to work for myself. I've done it for 2 years, which is also kind of lovely.
Yeah, that is good. But I mean, that now you get to do what you want, and you get to stand by your values. You don't have to be like, you're saying this, but you're not doing this. And I know that that's true. Yeah. Okay. How can I, as a visually white person, although I am Indigenous, offer to support BIPOC members without their insight and barriers? I guess just without their insight.
Without their insight?
Yeah, so I think what they're getting at is like, even though they're Indigenous, they appear visibly white. And how can they offer support to BIPOC members without, like, I guess, the direction of the BIPOC members? I got these submitted, so I'm not 100% sure, but that's what I'm kind of getting at.
Yes, yeah. This one's so hard because there's so many people who are Indigenous or other people from what are considered visible minority groups that can still be like, they could still be white passing. And so it becomes complicated because we kind of turn on each other instead of like looking outward. But I think one of the best things that you could do, or anyone can really do who's an ally, who is part of the community, is just it's important to educate yourself. I'm going to shift this a little bit to like all folks, like allies as well.
I was thinking that too. I was going to say maybe all allies, because that's a question that I think comes up regularly.
Yeah. So the first thing, I think a lot of people think that what they're doing is like, when they go ask like a person of color, like, what should I read? How can I educate myself? That's the first mistake, because what you're doing is like, Google is so free and Google is right there, and you can start to like, search for yourself. But by asking somebody else who's going through what you're trying to research or look up, by asking them that, you're actually putting the emotional labor back on them. So that's one thing. The other thing is that when you do make a mistake, and you will make mistakes, there was this thing going around in the summer of 2020 about allyship fatigue. And allies were like, I'm so tired, like the directions keep changing, I'm exhausted. And that's great and all, but we don't get to take a nap and wake up and feel refreshed. So, there's things like that, being cautious of that. But then when you make a mistake or you say something that is offensive, perhaps, it's apologizing to that person once and then letting it go, because the more you apologize and want someone to make you feel better about what you did, that's emotional labor as well. And so, read books, and don't read, I don't want to say don't read my book, but read books that came before my book, and read books that came way before, so that you can get a sense of how slavery translates into systemic racism, how systemic racism then translates into what's going on today in the world around you. And I think some other ways to kind of do this is to think about the kinds of things we say. So someone shares an experience with you around race. It's not saying like, are you sure? It's not playing devil's advocate. Devil's advocate is it's gaslighting. It's just a fancy, cute word for gaslighting. But being cautious of the things that you say and even your own beliefs. And so I don't know who said this. I saw it on Instagram or somewhere, but they said the first thing that comes out of your mouth is not the real you. The real you is what comes out second, in the way that you correct it, right? The way that you kind of correct yourself. So that's really important, to constantly be willing to commit to that learning process, even when you mess up, even when things change. And with that black square on Instagram changing, right? People said, put up a black square on Tuesday. And then they said, take down the black square. That's going to happen, but you have to be willing to kind of take that guidance, and it can get exhausting, but you're trying to follow that lead. So when I was saying, if you want to be an ally, the group that you want to ally with has to see you as an ally. It does mean that you do have to kind of shift, right? You're not an ally until that group can acknowledge you as an ally. Someone just put Robin Maynard's book in the chat. That's an excellent book to read. It's a really, really good book to read. I like my students read that book. So that's a good place to start as well.
I think, yeah, what you're saying is, it is important. And I think, folks can acknowledge that like the world is changing and growing, and we are going to make mistakes. But what you've said, Eternity, is like, acknowledge those mistakes and move forward on it and be better. And so, there's so many things we look at examples, and people bring up all these examples of things that happened, or people said wrongdoings and have apologized and are like, hey, I want to do better. I want to learn more. I want to grow. And I think that's an important part, is like acknowledging the past harms we maybe have caused. And like, just like you said, like, you've done this. Okay. And then how can you move on without constantly asking like, oh, I'm sorry, can you forgive me, over and over again? Like that it's true, because that is emotional labor. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, no, but I just want that person to approve of me. It's like, well, I will if you just stop.
Yeah, exactly. If you just say it once, well, give me some room, I'll accept your apology.
Yeah, no, it's and also, even if
Oh, I think your internet cut
Oh
out.
yeah,
So
all that is very important. So this one is as someone who suffers from PTSD, I'm just wondering how you've been able to deal with your trauma, and how are you able to go through and live each day with the different traumas that you've experienced.
yeah, I didn't for a long time. I didn't, and like I was saying earlier, it wasn't until I like wrote my book, like had it out, that I was like, okay, because I never saw it. Like when I actually wrote the first couple of drafts of my book, I pitched it as a comedy, like a book of hilarious essays. My editor was like, this is not funny. Like it's not funny at all, and I had never given myself permission to deal with that. But I think the most important thing is that none of this, like healing is not a linear thing, right? Like there are good days and there are bad days. And I feel like there was a point when I was like, when are these cycles going to end, right? When am I going to stop making bad choices? When am I going to stop, retail therapying and drinking, and when will that get out? Because nothing feels right. And I don't feel like myself yet. And it's taken a lot of time. It's been about 7 years now. And it's a lot of therapy. A lot of therapy has helped. And kind of just being a bit kind to myself that not every day is going to look the same. Not every day am I going to progress. And there are some days when I don't. And I've acknowledged that's okay now. But I think a lot of people are also afraid to, they're afraid to go to therapy, or they come from a culture where therapy is seen as going to therapy or accessing therapy is seen as weak. And so I think that's the first step, is having a really good therapist on your side that you can talk to about a lot of this. And also doing things that get you back to you, whatever your you is really important. So I feel like for the most part, I'm always going to live like this, right? Like there's been a lot of things that have happened, but I can say that after 7 years, I feel so much better. Like I feel like I've gone to the other side, but that's also with continual therapy. And I've been in therapy since 2017, and have learned a lot, have read a lot of books, have done the work, and have taken a lot of steps backwards. But that doesn't mean that you're not, for me, it doesn't mean that I've failed. It just means that at least I've acknowledged that I've taken those steps back, and that is progress. Like that's growth to me.
Yeah, it's I think that's important is that like everyone just expects the trauma, not everyone, but folks just expect like, okay, I've lived this and the trauma will end, but like it does take work to undo that. It's like unraveling a ball of yarn. You have to work at it and slowly get through it. And again, we've said we have folks to assist with that. Someone did write a comment of like, yes, we've got great resources, but how much of it is used by people of color and how comfortable are they including students from other countries in these resources? And like it's a good point, right? Like if students don't know the services and supports, we work a lot with our international students to let them know that of the resources, and that like that wherever they're from, no one else is going to find out, because that's one of the common barriers for students accessing support, is that they're worried that their family, their home country might find out. So there's a lot of barriers to break down, and when even accessing it. But I guess maybe like that part, I know from the internal part, it was kind of about actually the college. But attorney, how, maybe can you talk about what it might be like to access counseling from like a diversity lens? And because it's can be seen as because you have like growing up with your grandparents and stuff, you were worried about some of the things that they would see or think of your experiences. Was counseling ever something that had been talked about in your home?
Yeah. So for all all the progressive and liberal, like I never grew up with gender expectations, just never any of that stuff. And counseling was like a weird one for some reason for my mom. Surprisingly, my grandfather, when I told him I was seeing a counselor, he's like, that's great. But at first, like the first time I had access, I was so confused. It was after my my relationship had ended with my first boyfriend. I think it was about 18 or 19. And I was like, I need to talk to somebody, because what I am feeling, what I'm going through, like I don't know if I'm going to be on this earth. Like it was that type of bad. And I was under my mom's plan because I was a minor at the time. So I was 18. And I said to her a couple of times in the car, just blurted it out, like, I think I need to see a therapist. And she wouldn't respond. Like, she said nothing. And my mom would never go to therapy. And I think we all should go to therapy just as people. It's great for all of us. And, she would never go, and she was silent. And so I just kind of took it upon myself. I like found one, but I actually booked like a psychotherapist or something, or a psychologist. And I was like, I booked this, you're taking me. And on the way there, we didn't talk about it. When I was done, we didn't talk about it. And then of course they tried to prescribe me pills. So I still didn't know what the difference was, because I was so young, and on my campus at Western, and this is still a very common problem. Sometimes you just don't know where to look. Like, I had no idea where to look. I went to my school because I actually took time off from school. I told them what had happened to me. Nobody offered me anything. Nobody gave me a brochure. Nobody knew what to do. And so I had no idea where to go. And it wasn't until later in life, in 2017, when I decided to go see a therapist. As an adult by then, I was just like, you know what? They don't like it. They don't like it. I'm just saying, this is what I do. It's good for me. And I had to kind of change my mind around that, right? Whether they think it's stupid or a waste of money, it's what I need. And so now I've got this like kind of, my therapist says this to me and it makes a lot of sense, but we used to see each other every week. And now we see each other when I need her. And she said to me the other day, I trust that you'll come to me when you're about to blow up your life. And it sounds bad, but it's good. It's a good thing, because I've gotten to the place where I'm able to kind of intuitively understand if something's going on or I'm about to go into old patterns. I can call her and we can have a chat about it. And I can do that also because I've let go of that kind of, fear from family. And as my family, I think as like kind of our world changes, my family is kind of coming around to it. But I know so many people who would not go, even in my own family. And you just have to let it go, because sometimes you really need therapy, right? And it's not, you need it, and it's not you. You're not the problem, right? Those ideas about what therapy is, that's not about you. Those are very, those are old. They need to be kind of hung up. So.
Yeah, and even like what you said is like like what your therapist said to you, like, if you can just think of it as like a car maintenance, like you maintain your car, you get your oil changed, you do all these things, you put gas in, and like you go to your mechanic when things are about to blow up. And I wish we would just treat mental health the same way we do as like, I need to go for my regular physical, I need to do these things, because we all could use someone to talk to and help us deal with anything, and so we have counseling on staff for students. It's a great resource. And again, there are barriers, and I totally understand those barriers, but maybe start with group counseling. Like, we run lots of great events on campus. Group counseling is great for students to access. And that's a good way to kind of get your foot in the door and see if maybe that's something that you'd be interested in. And the groups are kind of fun. There's lots of different ones, but anyways, there's lots of ways to get in there. What do you think about mandating anti-racism training for all students? And do you think it's possible to turn students off and cause a level of spitefulness to the cause? I guess what is the question.
Oh, yes, I think that it should be mandatory. Should be you should not be able to, I don't know, sign up or have privileges if you don't finish it. And I don't think that's a solution at all, but I think it's a good first step. But I do think people can be spiteful. This is actually, I was looking this up yesterday. There's a school in the UK called St. Andrews, and to enter, like to even like start school, you have to complete anti-racist and anti-sexist training and gender-based violence training. And people are really angry, and they're like, "Oh, the US has come to the UK with their BS." So I do think people will be spiteful, but I think people will be spiteful either, in any kind of situation, but you can save so many more students, right? You can save so many more students from committing sexual assault. You can save a lot of students from having, the N-word hurled at them by forcing students to kind of read through this. They may think twice, and I think that's the benefit. And so I think any of these initiatives that we're thinking of are going to cause a lot of backlash. And it's just the way that it is because it's so embedded in the culture.
I think what you're saying is so important, and we talk a lot about like harm reduction, and this is a harm reduction approach. Like, when seatbelts were first created, people backlash those. People will backlash anything new and progressive, and that the next generation is changing the world for the worse, but they're not. Like, things are, each time we learn of like something new, okay, we're gonna fix this problem, and slowly we chip away at those things and make things safer, and with a harm reduction lens, and people will be spiteful on anything that's new and progressive because it's new and progressive, and that's how the world works, I think. We're almost out of time for questions. So we've got a couple left here. I might finish on this last one because I think we have like 2 or 3 more minutes. But the last one is, what brings you joy in this work?
Oh, I think what brings me a lot of joy is having people kind of like see their experience or feel less alone in their experience when they read my book, when when I'm talking about this, when I'm reporting. That's what really brings me joy, because the moment, like the aha moment for me that I had was in my second year, when I was kind of, nobody understood what I was going through. I couldn't explain it. I didn't have the words for it. And I was like, I'm alone. This is like an experience that is unique to me. And then I read Bell Hooks, and I read her chapter Eating the Other, and my mind like exploded. It was this aha, this is not just me. This is rooted not only in a theory, but this is rooted in a history. And I'm not alone in that. And so that's always been my driving force for me, is that, can I create something, or can I create work where people will have that aha moment where they're feeling alone right now and can see it and say, okay, I feel less alone. And so that's the joy for me, is like bringing that to the surface. It's not joyful work by any means. Like, it's not fun work to do, but I think, at least to me, it's really necessary work. And it's important also, I'm learning that this not become my whole life. Like, this is something I do, this is my job, this is most of my passion, but that I leave room for a lot of joy in my life, because a lot of things I've gone through were not full of joy. And I want to have a good balance. So it is joyful, but it's also not joyful, but it's what I know that I'm meant to be doing.
Awesome. Okay, I feel like that was a good last question to like end on a positive note. So that is all the time that we have for questions. Thank you so much for this fantastic conversation. It was a pleasure listening to and learning from you. For those who've joined us today, we do have 20 copies of Eternity's memoir. They said it would be fun to give away. Everyone who registered for today's Third Thursday was entered into a draw, and we will share the names of the winners in the chat.
Oh, it seems like we've lost Sarah Crawford and Eternity. So on behalf of everybody, thank you so much for joining us today, Eternity. Thanks to everybody who took the time out of their day to reflect and learn, and have a wonderful Black History and Black Futures Month, everybody. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.